Like, we've been married 18 years. Our marriage, our friendship, every aspect of our relationship has gotten better and better every year. And I'm going, wow, that's totally different than the way the world does it, where it's basically this honeymoon and then down from here. But this gives me such an excitement about the rest of our lives together.
Welcome to the YWAM Kansas City podcast. We're here to activate our generation into missions and bring inspiration to live like Jesus in everyday life. Welcome back. I'm joined by Senior Coordinator Joel McGill for all of America, going after every person in America. Pretty crazy stuff. And today we want to talk about relationships and marriage, a subject that a lot of people care about. And so I'm excited. Joel has shared with a lot of our guys in our community, important to even me personally, on my way to marriage, which is very helpful. I appreciate that, Joel.
Proud of you. Proud of you.
Thank you. And this is possibly the second most important decision of people's lives, other than salvation. Next up, maybe marriage is the next thing. And so we want to take it seriously in that way. And Joel has an incredible family, 3 kids, incredible marriage. He was just with a handful of us just the other night. 4 guys that have been married in the last 2 months, basically. All ended up in my kitchen at my house. And Joel is just sharing stories and little tidbits with us. So, Joel, I'm excited you're here. And I'm excited to hear what you have to say on this subject as well. So, as we jump in, why don't you share just a little bit on your journey of marriage, and then we'll jump into some of the stuff that you were feeling on your heart.
Well, even as you called me senior coordinator, it's a little bit of a loose term. But, yeah, for me, this journey was really a train wreck my whole life. The idea of even the idea of having a healthy relationship seemed impossible, really. By the time I was 18 and, I probably had 25 girlfriends, most of them immoral, never really saw mom and dad interact besides television, just had completely unhealthy views on this and no good examples. And so when I went to do my discipleship training school with YWAM, I was of the opinion I would never get married. I just I am hopeless. I'm going to shave my head, be a monk, move to some monastery, and just try to hold out for Jesus to return. That was my actual plan, right? I was actually this is going to be my game plan.
The Christian version of a Tibetan monk.
Yeah, that's right. I was I just got to hold out long enough, because every time I got close to Jesus, right? And it's the devil's I see that hand, and then some girl would show up, and soon my walk with Jesus became a joke and hypocrisy and whatever. So for me, again, the idea of a healthy marriage, about a good father, a good relationship with your kids, that wasn't even, I didn't even know what that looked like. I didn't honestly have a framework. So my journey really came from a place of just really, really dysfunction and me not being in a good place, right? So that was something that I remember I was in a relationship with a girl, totally inappropriate, immoral on a lot of levels. She was a pastor's daughter. I thought she'd be a good accountability partner. Nobody told me. So
really?
I was no, that's not really work. She was more interested in the old Joel than the new Joel. And so anyway, got caught up in a bunch of stuff, and it was my fault totally too. And anyway, I was actually asking God to take her away. I was I got to get out of this relationship, but I was too weak. I was hooked, And so I'm God, you got to do it. And she broke up with me, right? And then I'm why, God? Why'd you do this? I was so mad, right, that this happened, not remembering a month before I had actually asked him to get her out of my life. Yeah. And so anyway, he's very patient. He's very long-suffering with me. But anyway, I was just processing with God, and I was why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep getting in these unhealthy relationships? Why am I want to follow you. I want to serve you. And I just keep shooting myself in the foot. And the Lord began to speak to me in a different way. He's got to, because I'm so different. But he gave me this picture of picking up your paycheck, right? And I've always worked. I've always had a job trying to help my mom out, who was raising us 3 kids on her own. So he really showed me the idea of when you could go get your paycheck, imagine your boss comes in and calls you in. And is like, hey, Joel, you've been really good. Or Jonathan, you've been doing a great job. Appreciate all your work. Hey, here's a bonus, right? And then they hand you a check for like $500 or something. And the Lord asked me, he's like, how do you feel in that moment when you get that check? And I was like, I feel good, And he's like, what are you going to do with that check? And I thought, well, I might buy a big TV or might go do something fun with it, right? And he's like, but do you think about like paying your bills? Do you think about like just, paying for your electricity? I'm like, no, I don't do that. That's what I use my paycheck for. And he began to just talk me through this idea of like, what do I base my life and my kind of standard of living off of? And what he showed me was, he said, Joel, he's like, you've been living off your bonus. And he's like, I want to be your paycheck. I want to be the thing that sustains you. And like, people are going to come and go, right? So I'm going to bring somebody in your life. And, if you're living off of your bonus, you're going to get into financial ruin, right? And he showed me that that's what I was doing, is I was basing how well I was doing and base my, my stability off of these other people that I was really putting a burden on them, right? To sustain me or to make sure I'm okay. And the Lord just invited me into a different level of friendship that I just didn't, he wasn't my everything. And and when I did, it meant that people could come, and maybe my boss calls me into the office the next day and say, hey, sorry, check's not good. We're having a bad year. You can't, you can't cash that check. And you'd be like, okay, well, at least I have a job. At least I have something. You're going to be okay. And so the Lord just reoriented me. And from there, that really helped me, I think, prepare me for the marriage I have now and for the family I have, is that, at the end of the day, Jesus is my paycheck. And, I'm not banking on anybody else having to provide my sustenance and my stability. And because of that, I can enjoy it, right? So then I can buy the big screen TV. I can celebrate them and have them in my life, and I don't need anything from them. I can actually just celebrate them, enjoy them for who they are. So I call that my bonus theory. The Lord spoke that when I was 18, and it's to this day been kind of my true north with all friendships, with all relationships, to really treat people like a bonus, to celebrate them, enjoy them, but not necessarily bank my life on, having them around.
That's really good. I really like that analogy, where you're not looking for someone to fill a void in your heart or to complete you, or you need XYZ in order to even make it through the day from people, but instead you got Jesus giving you your baseline, your paycheck. He's the one that fulfills you, satisfies you, and anything on top of that basically is your bonus check. It's the gravy on top, the cherry on top, or whatever the analogy you want to use. I love that. I really love that analogy because I think it's simple and it's helpful.
It's got to be simple for me, bro.
Bro, it's got to be you and me both, bro. Every male on planet Earth, it's got to be simple. So with that, I want to pull a little bit more out. I know you've studied out just relationships in general, and marriage being probably the most important one from a human level. I know from Genesis to Revelation, you got tons of thoughts, you got notes, you got all these things, you got a whole week's worth of teachings. What would you say is, to come back to the foundation block, some of God's original thoughts on what marriage should be? And from there, how do we walk that out in like a practical way? So maybe starting some of the foundational places there.
Yeah, well, for me, again, I was probably married 9 years before I realized what I'd gotten myself into in regards to God's original purpose. And I have a whole journey of faith in this area of just trusting God daily for what it means to be a husband and wife. I had no grid for that, and then even a father and my wife being a mother in our relationship, we had to really, the Lord had to take us to school. And what was fascinating for us as we've got deeper and deeper into it, the Lord began to really show us that, number one, it's not about us. That actually, I have a phrase and I use in this teaching. It's basically that God created the Sabbath for man, but he created marriage for himself. And that if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, there's only going to be one real wedding, in the end of the age, that wedding is the wedding, and even as Jesus says to the Sadducees, like, you're not even going to be married in heaven. So obviously if we need it to be fulfilled, we would need it in heaven, but we don't. So our fulfillment in this earth and the next is Jesus himself and the great, wedding that we're looking forward to. So to understand that wedding as a framework, as a concept, is actually all about him, and it's for him. And man, I have gotten so much in this that the Lord showed me in the Word that just it's so a consistent story from Genesis to Revelation. And I think about Mary's interaction with Jesus at the wedding, right? He's starting his ministry, and you would think like a single guy who's probably is never going to get married on earth, right? And she's asking him about wedding plans, and all these situations. And you kind of look at that like, why is she talking to him about that? But she understood he was the groom. There's no, like at the end of this thing, like he is the real deal. He is the wedding planner. Like he is the most romantic being in the universe, and he knows this subject better than anybody. So she's talking to like the expert, right? There's nobody who knows more about weddings than Jesus. And as I began to really dive into that, it just gave me such a deeper understanding of what I'm a part of when I said yes to my wife. And we've been married 18 years. And I can say, like, from both of us having devastation in our background of her parents divorced, mine divorced, and never having a good example. Like I was telling you the other night, like we've been married 18 years. Our marriage, our friendship, every aspect of our relationship has gotten better and better every year. And I'm going, wow, that's totally different than the way the world does it, where it's basically this honeymoon and then down from here. But this gives me such an excitement about the rest of our lives together, that it's actually going to go from glory to glory. And that ultimately when we pass from this life into the next, it's going to go to even more glory. We're going to have an unbelievable marriage, and that marriage is just a foreshadowing of that. And so anyway, like I said, I feel like I'm more sober than ever as to what it is and what it isn't. And I think in our culture, we have such bad teaching on this. It's so worldly. It's so shallow in a lot of ways. We're very much, it's just a bunch of cultural paradigms. It's not, I believe it's not really founded in the Word. And so we overemphasize marriage, but we devalue it all at the same time. And so I feel like God's really, getting back to what it really is, which it's about him. It's ultimately for him, about him. We don't get anything out of it. We're not meant to. It's actually a road of death to lay down your life daily, and it's so that the world can get a picture of what heaven looks like and what we're moving towards together.
Come on. I want to ask a question off what you just said.
That's a lot. Yeah.
No. Well, I could have asked 4 questions, but one in there in particular. You mentioned how we often get kind of our storyline on marriage from the world. What would be some areas where you've seen commonly where that happens, and in particular with believers? So I'm a Christian, guy or gal, and married or unmarried, both. What are some things I should be thinking about in terms of pitfalls or traps that culture says this is what marriage should look like, and I'm unaware that actually doesn't line up with the Bible?
Sure.
What would be some like key ones there? There's probably some obvious ones, maybe some not as obvious ones. Maybe just spitball a few for us.
Yeah. If you're lonely, marriage is not the solution for you, right? I've met some of the most lonely married people ever. That is not a reason to get married. If you are lonely, it's because you're not plugged into the church. And when God looked at Adam and said it's not good for man to be alone, it wasn't because he was unmarried. It's because there was no fellowship of the body, right? Or else it was Jesus and Paul were bad. That's not what he was referring to. He's talking about fellowship and community, and we're called for family. We're called for community, regardless of whether you're married or not. So I think the idea of like marriage is going to somehow, it's an application of that, but it's certainly not the only one. And I think if you're lonely, number one, there is a depth of intimacy with Jesus that will satisfy that. And then there's a depth of wholesome relationship and family in the body that God's called you into, that you should enter into. And again, marriage can often be, if poorly chosen, a really bad substitute or a bad solution to that. So I think getting married because you're lonely, not the right solution.
That's a good word.
I think thinking that somehow your ministry and the fullness of it is going to be tied to getting married, I don't see that anywhere in the Bible. I don't see Jesus modeling that. I don't see Paul modeling that. I think that's totally the wrong reason to get married. Not that God can't bring two people together and have an impactful marriage, but to think that it's required, I think that's a misunderstanding. I don't think you should do it. I think a lot of it is, again, understanding that like marriage is hard. Even 1 Corinthians 7 is you know from my teaching of just how important that is to understand. And most people write that off to be like, well, Paul's just sharing his opinion and doesn't really mean. I'm like, listen, a whole chapter dedicated to this guy's random opinion is not the way Scripture works. For him to go so deep into it, and I believe what he was saying is like, listen, if you can't control yourself, just get married. Fine. You know what I mean? Like that's what the world does. Like, sure, if you're giving yourself to the flesh and you're just going to live in the flesh, then get married. But I believe Paul in Ephesians and Corinthians is appealing to us saying, man, there is such a deeper way. There is something of the Spirit that we can actually tap into that's been a mystery in the Old Testament, wasn't understood because they didn't have the understanding of the church. And that he's appealing to them to actually go deeper into knowing Jesus. He even says if you don't have a wife, don't seek one, which is completely opposite of what most of the advice out there is. Go out there and pursue and chase a wife. And again, I don't necessarily see that in Scripture either. And so, you have a lot of cultural paradigms that are, I think, infused in people's fear that they're going to stay single, that they're going to over-spiritualize it, and that they're going to end up with... I've never found that, actually. I find the ones that take this category seriously and really seek the Lord on it and allow Jesus to be Lord of this area of their life, pretty much all the ones I can think of are married, right? And they didn't start that way. So I think that's the other misconception, is the idea that if somehow you involve Jesus in the process, you're going to end up like bitter and single or something like that, which is, again, not the case. I think
you have to be a monk. Like
that's all right. That's what I was going. I thought that was the way to go. But I think like I said, I think there's a lot of misconceptions. But again, number one is that Jesus, he invented romance. This is his jam. Like, he is the best at it in the world. And when God is the one who instigates the relationship, I find that he will move heaven and earth to do it. And I think the other thing is, even with dating, like why you don't see dating in the Bible, and this is, I think, an important piece, is because people understood the significance of it. They understood how important marriage was, that people didn't just make that decision on their own. I think that's another mistake people do now, is they're out there just willy-nilly trying to hook up, and they're making the decision outside of counsel. And I think having godly people seek God with you about some of these decisions before you engage their heart, before you spend all this money.
Not 6 months in.
Not 12 months in. I'm going to save you a bunch of money. Maybe you can just send me all the money that you were going to spend on all those dates, right?
Like, hey, Joel, I'm 12 months into this relationship. Can you pray if you think this is from God or not? I know I've already bought a ring. I'm right there, but just can you double check?
How many times I've had that conversation? And I told one of them, actually, I think you should break up and start over, and then I'll pray with you. I was like, I'm not going to jump into your mess. I don't know how to even give good advice in that situation. I'm like... And
you were talking about people kind of drifting into a relationship a little bit more out of emotion, more out of just kind of seeing the world and like... We're dating, and then you're like, they're months into it, and now they're like, oh yeah, godly counsel, we should do that thing.
This is the whole, I saw her, she had her hands up in worship, she must be a woman of God, right? And I'm like,
you were butterfly in my stomach, and she looked at me. The Lord just spoke to me.
You were probably staring at her too much in worship. That's probably part of the time. So I think, again, there's misconceptions of being so casual. I think another thing, it's generational. I think the older generation, there was more of a peer pressure to stay together. And we just don't have that context anymore. I got like 16 divorced friends. And so for me to understand the war that we're in over marriage and to take it so cavalier and to expect that there's going to be some kind of peer pressure, it's just not like that anymore. There is so much peer pressure to stay separate, to actually get out of it. That's why I really challenge the people I get to work with, like yourself and a number of others, when they help them navigate this area. It's got to have the word of the Lord. We need the word of the Lord to sustain and to have healthy marriages, I think, in this time, because we have no pressure to work it out. And it is going to be a battle. It is going to be hard. It's not going to fulfill you. It's not going to satisfy you. You're going to have to find that from the Lord and bring that to the table. So when I look at relationships, I'm looking for strength. that she's in strength, he's in strength. They know who they are in the Lord. They're on mission. They know where they're going. And when I see God calling those two together, and I even look for resistance, like, maybe I want Jesus. I'm enjoying him. I love him. And I see, and they're like, but I feel like God's saying this is someone that could go after this, this pursuit together. Then I'm like, hey, this could be good. This could be the right deal. But when I see them chasing it, I see them looking for it to be this, potion to solve their problems. I'm like, oh no, I don't want to.
Or looking for any way to make it fit.
Yeah.
We can make this work any way possible.
I know. And like I said, I'm just not seeing them work out anymore. I got too many friends that are divorced, and that seems to be the pattern. It was them instigated. But, the model I really encourage people is the Genesis model. Is, Adam was fulfilled. He was in the garden. He was enjoying the Father, right? He's enjoying Jesus. He's in the cool of the day with God. Adam was not thinking he was alone. Adam wasn't thinking he was missing anything. He was satisfied. And it was God that looked at Adam and said, it's not good for man to be alone. God was the instigator of the relationship, not Adam. And then it was fascinating. Instead of him running around, he actually put him to sleep. And so he was at rest. He was at peace. He was trusting God to prepare his bride or, his spouse. And what was amazing is God fashioned them, prepared them, and then he woke him and presented his bride. And I just think, man, if we just allowed God to arrange our marriages and let him play the role that he is ultimately, this is all just a shadow of, right? He's the ultimate groom. We're the ultimate bride. This is something that is so much bigger than us. Letting him do it, man, it becomes supernatural. It's now like ours, it's remarkable that my wife and I are still married, like after 18 years and considering our background. But I'm just telling you, when God is in it and he's the instigator, he fights for our marriage every single day, right? And I feel it tangibly. God is fighting daily for our marriage to succeed, sometimes in spite of us. So that's what I'm
so good, man.
Running on right there.
So good, Joe. Well, I want to pick your brain on this subject more in the future. But I think this is so good. Anyone out there, whether they're married or single, I think they can take away some of the points that you were just sharing with us. Are you fulfilled in Jesus? The things you said about, hey, make sure these aren't the things that are leading you into the relationship, but it's God instigated, but just like Genesis with Adam. And even what the ultimate picture of marriage is, it's Jesus, the bride. He's the expert on this subject.
That's right.
Maybe we should submit to his lordship in this category. I feel like there's certain categories where you're like, yeah, Jesus, you're Lord of this area and this area, but marriage, money. I mean, there's a few categories where you're like, I'm gonna keep lordship in that area, but he goes for the whole package.
Yeah. Well, I think even just one, like if I said to you, Jonathan, I want you to quit what you're doing, and I want you to come and work for me for the next 30 years of your life. Would you just say yes, or would you pray about it? Would you seek counsel? What would be your process?
If it was you, I'd just say yes.
No,
it'd be a process.
But you know what I'm saying? You would have some level of seeking counsel. You'd probably pray and fast.
I wouldn't just be like, yeah, maybe, I guess, sure.
Right.
And you just kind of drift into it.
So with these romantic relationships, you're making a 50-year commitment. You're making a 60-year commitment. You're making a 40-year commitment. You're making some level of commitment for the rest of your life. You're going to join that ministry. You're going to be with that person.
Right.
And to base it off of their looks, which will fade, they're
Really?
even the way well, it's already started with me.
Right.
But or to base it off of maybe their best foot forward, that you're only seeing like a few minutes of day, and they're always putting their best foot forward, which when you get married, that's gone anyway. And so you have this idea of like you're basing it on such temporary perspectives. And I remember, I'll say in closing, I was picking up Naomi one day, and we were just starting to date, and she was walking to the car, and I was just sitting there, and I felt the Holy Spirit say to me, he said, Joel, he said, I want you to know I picked Naomi not because of who she is right now, but for who she'll be 50 years from now. That's why I picked her for you.
Come on.
And I'm like, that's such a smarter way to choose a partner than the temporary limited understanding, especially mine, that I have in this day. And I'm just so grateful. And that's been the journey of discovery in our marriage, of just literally every year going, that's why you picked her. Wow. Like I didn't, and just he saw the end from the beginning. And so why not include him?
Come on. So good, Joel. Appreciate you stopping by, man. We'll pick more of your brain later. And I hope for the listeners out there, this was super helpful for you, and I'm sure it was. And really, I would encourage those who have been listening to this, really ask the Lord, is this an area that I've given you full lordship over, or have I held back certain categories of this area? And I think that's a great application moment from this. So,
right. And seek counsel.
And there's 5 other application moments. You can look through the whole and take notes. Go back, rewind this, and take notes. So thanks for listening, guys. Appreciate it. Be on the lookout for more awesome episodes from YWAM Kansas City podcast on our YouTube channel, Spotify, iTunes, all those good things. We appreciate you guys.
Thanks for tuning in to our YWAM Kansas City podcast. If you enjoyed listening, please subscribe, share, and leave a rating. If you are watching, please like, comment, share, and subscribe, and be sure to turn on our post notifications to catch our podcasts as soon as they're released. We'll see you next time.